5 studio albums, countless hits, hundreds of millions of fans. For the 14 years that The Weeknd has existed in pop culture, perhaps no artist has shook up the charts while maintaining such artistry and storytelling in our modern era of music. However, with such a reputation, how does one end a career of such historic magnitude? For some, the more important question would be, why would you want to so soon? Since 2022, The Weeknd has teased the prospect of moving on from his famous moniker, expressing desires to kill The Weeknd in musical form on numerous occasions. While this may appear on the surface as self-inflicted harm, Abel's desire to move on from his famous character stems less from his want to see his own demise, but rather his need to escape the shadow of The Weeknd, a character that, to Abel, less represents his brilliant artistry, but rather exists as a sonic embodiment of Abel's sorrow and sin-filled past. While Abel started his career as a troubled kid from Scarborough, Abel has matured since his trilogy days. No longer does he escape his emotional pain through women and substances. Abel has strived for sobriety in recent years and attempted to live overall a better life now that the grind from the hard times has paid off. However, Abel's past reputation still haunts him. In fact, it defines him. Stuck at a standstill in his career, trapped between his past demons dragging him down and his anxiety towards the uncertainty of tomorrow stopping him from embracing a fresh start, Abel would ultimately use music as an outlet to navigate this spiritual clash, with the conflict providing the perfect inspiration for his 6th and final album released under the Weeknd title, Hurry Up Tomorrow. Heavily influenced by a 2022 incident in SoFi Stadium where Abel lost his voice on tour, this album officially closes out The Weeknd's After Hours Till Dawn trilogy, first started back in 2020 with the release of After Hours. Along with closing out the new trilogy, Hurry Up Tomorrow acts as the final Weeknd project to ever be released, and the contents of the record, specifically the album story, is directly rooted in that fact. Taking inspiration from various sci-fi films, as well as a few David Lynch projects, this record details the internal battle between Abel Tesfaye versus The Weeknd, as Abel officially undergoes a rebirth kickstarted on Dawn FM. At 22 tracks long and with a runtime of just over an hour 25, Hurry Up Tomorrow acts as an operatic and emphatic conclusion to The Weeknd's story, seeing Abel open up in a way that he never has before, as well as ultimately uncover the roots to some of his deepest scars. Detailing the official timeline of this album's rollout, as well as analyzing the deeper story of spiritual transformation behind these tracks, this is the story behind The Weeknd's Hurry Up Tomorrow. Shortly following the release of his 5th studio album Dawn FM, The Weeknd would make some shocking revelations about his future catalog as well as career at large. Just days after releasing Dawn FM in January of 2022, Abel would put out a tweet on the 10th that read, "I wonder, did you know you're experiencing a new trilogy?" While many fans around this point in time had already started to speculate that Dawn FM and After Hours were kind of linked and Abel was telling a story bigger than just one record, this cryptic announcement of sorts, it was groundbreaking. Abel started out his career, of course, with Trilogy, a collection of 3 mixtapes that introduced The Weeknd to the world and were eventually re-released together as Abel signed his first big record deal as simply Trilogy. The Weeknd story began with a trilogy, and soon enough in time we would learn that this final trilogy Abel is curating here would also be the way that The Weeknd story ends. For the remainder of 2022, Abel would embark on the After Hours Till Dawn North American tour. But also in that time, he would really be hyping fans up about his HBO Max show that he made in collaboration with Euphoria creator Sam Levinson called The Idol. The show would pretty much be Abel's main focus throughout the following year, 2023 as well, with it officially premiering in June, and also The Weeknd releasing an entire soundtrack full of brand new songs exclusively written for the show. Prior to the show officially premiering in June, Abel would participate in a lot of press, and specifically talking to W Magazine in May of 2023, Abel would get into the topic of his future as The Weeknd. When speaking to the publication, Abel would say, "I'm going through a cathartic path right now. It's getting to a place in a time where I'm getting ready to close the Weeknd chapter. I'm still going to make music, maybe as Abel, maybe as The Weeknd, but I still want to kill The Weeknd. And I will, eventually. I'm definitely trying to shed that skin and be reborn." Furthermore, Abel would say, "The album I'm working on now is probably my last hurrah as The Weeknd. This is something that I have to do. As The Weeknd, I've said everything I can say." Now, when this news first hit, it was extremely shocking. And with a discography like The Weeknd's that's so lore-driven, I think it made sense for so many people in the fan base to have like a sad reaction to this. A lot of fans have an attachment to the Weeknd name. It's an essential part of the XO brand. However, the way I see it is from the first chapter of the Weeknd story, House of Balloons, to where we are now, Abel has developed so much, both in the story of this final trilogy, and it seems like in real life, Abel has strayed away from that bad boy druggy lifestyle. He's gotten older, he's gotten more mature, and he's started reflecting on his life, reflecting on his legacy. The reputation that the Weeknd has, it no longer reflects who Abel is as a person. Not that he looks at his past work in a negative light, in negative fashion in any way. It's actually quite the opposite. In Abel's own words, it's time. He said everything he has to say, and it's time to close this chapter and start something new. Beyond Abel just outgrowing the Weeknd persona, the switch would be heavily inspired by an event during the After Hours Till Dawn tour in 2022, which is likely the single most important event in this record's entire rollout. On September 3rd, 2022, The Weeknd was set to perform the final show of the tour at SoFi Stadium. However, as Abel began the show with Alone Again, he couldn't sing. As his voice gave out, Abel would be visually emotional on stage, upset at the idea of letting his fans down, having no choice but to walk off stage and reschedule the show. Now, many fans figured that this whole entire ordeal, with Abel singing his ass off at all these stadium tour stops, it was just due to natural wear and tear on his vocals. However, 2 years after the SoFi Stadium incident, Abel would open up in a big way and reveal that essentially this entire ordeal was caused by himself. Speaking to Variety in January of 2025, Abel would state that he got his vocal cords checked after the show, in that they were fine, just a tad bit inflamed, which was natural for, again, being at the end of a stadium tour. What this meant was that Abel lost his voice because of himself. He was in his own head. Looking back on his mental state in 2022, Abel would reflect and say that he was under intense stress and exhaustion between filming The Idol and the tour life. But overall, he walked away from the experience understanding that, quote, "I needed to sit the fuck down and figure out my life, to understand what happened, face it, learn something new, and start again. I'd had a kind of mental breakdown, which is pretty much what this new album is about." As I stated, this incident is what led to Abel deciding to change his name and retire the Weeknd moniker. Abel would say, "Part of me was thinking, you lost your voice because it's done. You said what you had to say. Don't overstay at the party. You can end it now and live a happy life, you know? Put the bow on it. Hurry up tomorrow? Now we're here. When is the right time to leave, if not at your peak? Once you understand who I am too much, then it's time to pivot. I just want to know what comes after. I want to know what tomorrow looks like." We had no knowledge of this at the time, but Abel would eventually reveal that a decent chunk of his new album, the third installment of this new trilogy allegedly, was completely finished up until the moment this SoFi incident happens. However, it is when Abel loses his voice and has this mental breakdown that he truly finds inspiration for the final chapter of this trilogy and the final chapter of the Weeknd's story as a whole, getting back into the studio to completely rework the record. So, Voice is lost September 2022. We know that Abel locks into the studio, reworking the current material he has finished in late 2022 to somewhere in early 2023, as he tells The Hollywood Reporter, top of that year in January, that he has been, quote, inspired and also, quote, in the studio recently. As I touched on earlier, Abel spent most of 2023 really focused on The Idol, with the show premiering in the summertime and stirring up a lot of controversy. Through it all, many fans were dying for Weeknd-related news, to which Abel would finally tell Variety in June, "I'm finishing the third part of this saga, of this trilogy. The name of it will come out soon." Despite this, fans would not hear anything regarding new Weeknd material until the new year 2024. But in hindsight, we do know that Abel did a lot of work on this record here in the second half of 2023. Abel would share pictures of himself with Metro Boomin in late August. But we also have this picture from September of 2023 now, with these studio sessions all going down at Conway Studios in LA. Additionally, we know that the track Timeless got its start in December of 2023, with production from Pharrell and of course that feature from Playboi Carti. So, despite Abel being quiet towards the fans, major progress on this record was being made. Abel's first official tease of this final installment of the trilogy would come on January 7th, 2024, posting 3 pictures to Instagram: the After Hours cover art, the Dawn FM cover art, and finally, a question mark. Once again reminding fans about the new trilogy concept with the caption 3. After spending the last year and a half heavily focused on The Idol, fans were really excited to begin the new year off fresh and shift gears now towards the final installment of this trilogy, with the teases continuing into February, as Abel would post on the 4th a picture from the studio. About 2 weeks later that same month, Abel would post some cryptic shots from an old school theater on his birthday, with the display board on the outside of the building reading, "The greatest trilogy known to man." I think it's actually really telling that these pictures along with that statement was delivered on Abel's birthday. The first trilogy that began the Weeknd story, it's all about Abel's hedonistic lifestyle and specifically the toxic relationship between himself and Valerie. However, this last and final trilogy, it's about himself. Specifically, the album that this video is about in particular, Hurry Up Tomorrow, is a cryptic, at times dark self-reflection that shows honestly how much Abel has matured both artistically and as a person. With the subject matter on this final trilogy installment being so heavy, Abel knew that he needed to step up his game in the studio, specifically with that synth pop sound utilized on After Hours and Dawn FM. While One Tricks Point Never and Elangelo specifically did phenomenal work on the first 2 installments of the After Hours Till Dawn trilogy, The Weeknd would add the legendary producer Mike Dean to his team in the process of creating Hurry Up Tomorrow. Mike Dean is an absolute legend. Many people know him for his work in contributing to making some of Kanye's greatest albums. He was also super hands-on with a lot of Travis Scott's records up until Utopia as well. While he is known most famously for his work on the keys being called the Synth God, Dean can also shred guitar, and in general, he's just a great asset for any artist to have in the studio on their team. Prior to linking and officially forming a friendship in 2022, Abel and Mike Dean were not super unfamiliar with each other. As I said, he was Kanye's right-hand man for, 15, 17 years almost? Abel collaborated a few times with Kanye and very frequently with Travis Scott over the years, so him and Mike were definitely familiar with each other. But after working together once again during Kanye's Donda album process, specifically with Abel hopping on the hook of the track Hurricane, The duo of Mike Dean and The Weeknd would reconnect in 2022 when Abel asked Mike to perform with him at Coachella. In April of 2022, Dean did his magic to Abel's setlist with some insane transitions and synth additions to older Weeknd tracks, and ever since the duo has pretty much become best friends. Mike Dean opened for Abel during the After Hours Till Dawn tour in 2022. He was also very involved with the Idol soundtrack, but fans were mostly excited for what he was going to add to The Weeknd's official studio album. The Idol stuff was cool, but I mean, this guy worked right by the side of Kanye, constructing My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. He knows how to craft a proper fucking album. In April of 2024, just 2 months after The Weeknd uploaded those pictures at the Old School Theater, Mike Dean would have a show at the Wiltern in LA, to which Abel would make a surprise appearance, showing up and performing 2 brand new tracks with Dean. About an hour into the show, the lights go down, and Mike would start a brand new track with the sounds of The Weeknd harmonizing with the synths, creeping in to reveal the surprise appearance. The first song premiered would actually be a cover of a track from the film Eraserhead, directed by the legendary David Lynch. Abel and Mike Dean would perform their rendition of the Lady in the Radiator song here, aka In Heaven, which some fans expected on Hurry Up Tomorrow. I personally am still obsessed with this cover. Abel is clearly a huge fan of David Lynch's work, but specifically with this final trilogy having that theme of rebirth, it certainly makes sense to draw inspiration from Lynch's work. However, once again at the Wiltern, Mike Dean and Abel performed In Heaven before the track beautifully would transition into another brand new song, Take Me Back to LA, which maybe I shouldn't call new, because Abel actually premiered this song back on Instagram Live in March of 2020, right after the release of After Hours. This was the first time that fans heard any new material during this new and final Weeknd era, and I believe personally, looking back with hindsight, both of these tracks perfectly gave fans a glimpse into the sounds as well as conceptual themes that Hurry Up Tomorrow had in store. Following this performance, fans began to get really hype about the prospect of new Weeknd material. Abel had multiple awesome features off the recent Future and Metro Boomin albums that dropped around this time in spring of 2024. And as the summertime began, The Weeknd would heavily start teasing this project on socials. It all began on July 2nd, when Abel would upload this short clip to Instagram, a tight close-up shot of a child version of himself. 5 days later, Abel would increase the hype even more, cryptically posting a picture of the Apostle Paul to Instagram with the following quote from scripture as the caption: "The present humanity is frail, deteriorating and weak, but to share eternal life, the bodies must be transformed." When Abel is on his cryptic shit, we know something is going down musically. So again, while we didn't know the exact context of this post yet, we'll talk about the significance of St. Paul on this record very soon with the analysis. But I just want to clarify, it did kind of feel at this point in time like Abel was kind of about to start the rollout, maybe drop a single or something in the summer of 2024. Around this time too, it had been heavily rumored since the spring that Abel was going to be dropping in July. However, soon on July 17th, Abel would make a huge announcement pertaining to the record that would halt those talks. On the 17th, via Instagram, Abel would announce a big special concert in Sao Paulo, Brazil for September 7th, seemingly to premiere the brand new album. This announcement was also kind of a sign like the rollout was not getting kickstarted until the fall, September 7th at the earliest. But regardless of the impatience from fans, the location of this event, Sao Paulo, would have a lot of significance, as the previous year in Brazil, when Abel was performing in the city, Abel would say while performing the track Faith, "I think I found my religion in Brazil today." Fans would make that connection once the announcement was made with the official Rebirth set for September. With the 2 months between the announcement of Sao Paulo and the concert itself, Abel would strategically post various cryptic videos, often featuring unheard tracks that fans expected to hear in Brazil, with these clips really furthering the narrative of rebirth for this album with the powerful animated visuals. finally, as September began, just 3 days prior to the big show in Brazil, Abel would officially reveal the album title for the final Weeknd album to fans with this massive, beautiful, and poetic statement released to socials. Dropped on September 4th, Abel's statement would read, "Yesterday was 14 years ago. We held our breath, falling into a shimmering sea in the after hours of the night. Attempted to cleanse the wounds with melodies and lights, a bulletproof bandage to shield what lies beneath. In a place where the seasons never changed, where time ceased to exist, but therein lies the problem. Today has felt like an endless spin. I keep distorting the truth, immune to the dizziness, numb to the nausea. What lies beneath screams in silence. I look in the mirror and feel both old and new, stuck in limbo and unable to move. I still haven't faced myself. More songs could help, but what more do I have left to say? Woe is me in the gilded cage, right? The very thing that once made me feel invincible failed me on the world stage. A new trauma surfaced, opening the floodgates. A new path awaits. When today ends, I'll discover who I am. Hurry up. Tomorrow." This statement really acted as not only an explanation for this album's title, Hurry Up Tomorrow, but also an explanation almost for why Abel is leaving the Weeknd moniker behind. The announcements wouldn't stop there, as on the day of Sao Paulo, just prior to the show, Abel would drop the official album cover on fans. Now obviously, the cover has been changed since this reveal, but the original cover would be this shot that you're seeing right now, with Abel simply staring through your soul with tears in his eyes, the calming gray background providing the only vibrance in the shot. I remember talking about the album cover when it was revealed, and I wasn't a big fan. I do think now that it has been changed, I'm able to appreciate it as like a promo pic or something. I think it is a really striking pic of our boy, but I am happy that Abel changed the cover art because I think the new cover definitely represents the music and what you hear visually a lot better. It just fits in my opinion. I do believe that something else was going down on September 7th. No big deal, just the album premiere show. A total of 9 new tracks would be premiered in Brazil, 2 of which officially kicking off the show, those being Without a Warning and Wake Me Up. We had already kind of known about Wake Me Up, and many fans expected it on this record due to a previous leak, so hearing it for the first time officially here kicking off the show was insane. Abel would then break into some of his hits, with the rest of the set list being integrated between new Hurry Up Tomorrow tracks that fans were hearing for the first time and previously released material from the Weeknd's discography. As for the rest of the premiere tracks, Abel would play for the first time here Take Me Back to LA, Dancing in the Flames, Timeless featuring Playboi Carti, Sao Paulo featuring Anita, The Abyss with no Lana Del Rey at this time, Runaway, and In Heaven. Overall, this was a very entertaining show. Hell of a set by Abel, his vocals as always impeccable, and fans were very positive towards the new material that was premiered here. But there was just one question on everyone's mind, and that was, when are we getting this new album? Many people figured the Sao Paulo show was going to be the launching point for the rollout, and at first, it seemed like that was the case. Just a week after the show, Abel would drop the first single for Hurry Up Tomorrow, Dancing in the Flames, on September 13th. However, this release would fly under the radar for a Weeknd lead single. I honestly really like this track. I just think it was the wrong choice for a lead single. Despite this song getting its own music video and everything, when Hurry Up Tomorrow officially releases, Dancing in the Flames is noticeably left off the track list, which is very interesting. Part of the reason I think this track got slept on is because the night of the release, September 13th, Playboi Carti surprise dropped a longtime grill of his, All Red, and Abel had announced Dancing in the Flames was dropping on September 13th, like a week prior. But Carti and Abel kind of have a little bit of a mix over in there. Maybe that's a stretch, I don't know. Either way, RIP Dancing in the Flames, goddamn. Abel would actually drop another single just 2 weeks after the release of Dancing in the Flames, a collab with Playboi Carti, the track Timeless, which was premiered back at Sao Paulo as well. You may not want to admit it to yourself, but there was a time where we were all dying to hear Timeless in that studio version for the first time. When it was first premiered in Brazil, that shit sounded crazy. I just overplayed the fuck out of it personally. But unfortunately, after the release of these two singles, Abel would start to go quiet about the album once again. Like I said, many fans expected the Sao Paulo show to be the launching point for the album rollout and release. However, after a short set at the iHeartRadio Music Festival, Abel would head overseas to embark on an Australian leg of the After Hours Till Dawn tour to close out 2024. While on tour, Abel would drop yet another single for Hurry Up Tomorrow, this time the track Sao Paulo featuring Anitta, which I thought was yet another lackluster choice, but I did say that I hope this song grows on me in the context of the album, and after the album released and everything, we'll obviously get more into it with my album analysis, but it definitely did. Regardless, as I said earlier, Abel would stay mute regarding album details until November, where he would finally start feeling that fan impatience regarding this record's release and begin to drop details as to when we can expect this project to finally drop. After writing to fans via Twitter, "Enjoy the long goodbye, you'll wish we took our time," The Weeknd would post the Elton John track January on his Instagram story on the 17th of November, insinuating a January album release. Finally, on November 27th, 2024, The Weeknd would reveal the official release date for Hurry Up Tomorrow, January 24th, 2025. With the announcement coming on the same day that this new trilogy began, back when Heartless dropped on November 27th, 2019. Along with the reveal of the release date, Abel would also announce a special one-off concert for Hurry Up Tomorrow at the Rose Bowl in LA. And it's likely that this show was going to be kind of Abel performing the entire album all the way through. Would have been fucking insane. The craziest thing about it is the night that this show was going to go down on January 25th, all the planets were going to be aligning in the sky. It's an astrological event, and it would have been a really crazy visual as it could be seen from Earth when the concert's going down. Unfortunately, this event would have to be canceled, which we'll get into the unfortunate details in a few minutes here. At the time, we were just excited about this album coming out, though we didn't know of the cancellation. And with this wave of announcements, Abel would also announce the official Hurry Up Tomorrow movie to be starring himself, Jenna Ortega, and Barry Keoghan, and releasing in theaters in May of 2025. Fans have been hearing about the film for a long time prior to the announcement, and obviously Abel has an interest in acting. I'm not going to get too far into the details of the film because personally, at the time of me filming this, it has not released yet, and I also haven't seen it. So when we get into my whole album analysis and my thoughts on the plot, it will not be affected by the movie at all. I haven't seen it. Apparently, the movie is not exactly aligned with the story of the album. However, it is inspired by the music from the record. It's directed by Trey Edward Schultz. Very excited to see it. As the year 2024 came to a close, various billboards would begin to be seen in major cities across the world, featuring the phrase "The End" in the style of various Weeknd album themes. And as 2025 began, tomorrow was just on the horizon. As per Abel's announcement in November, the album was set to release on January 24th. However, just 1 week prior to the album's official release, tragedy would strike. Starting on January 7th, a series of wildfires would tear through Southern California, devastating San Diego County and the Los Angeles metropolitan area. Out of respect for the victims, Abel would delay the album's release and also outright cancel the Rose Bowl show, with it obviously taking place in LA. Overall, The Weeknd would state that Los Angeles has been a huge source of inspiration to him over the years, and the city is even named on a few tracks throughout this new trilogy, so it definitely makes sense. But finally, on January 31st, 2025, The Weeknd would release the final installment to the After Hours Till Dawn trilogy, Hurry Up Tomorrow, closing out The Weeknd's story with one hell of a finale. At 22 tracks long with a runtime of 1 hour and 25 minutes, the record explores the concepts of love, loss, anxiety, self-reflection, rebirth, and healing. This is the final artistic work from The Weeknd officially, and Abel described this record himself as like an opera. The story on this record is very dramatic, but what Abel means specifically is the sense and the overall sonic atmosphere that this album holds. It has this grand, moody feeling. That gothic, operatic sound was inspired, according to Abel, by Giorgio Moroder, legendary producer known for his work mostly with film soundtracks, specifically being behind the soundtracks for Scarface and Midnight Express. Abel not only samples two of Moroder's tracks on Hurry Up Tomorrow, but also got him in the studio to have some vocal and keyboard contributions on the track Big Sleep, which is fucking awesome. I have to say, between Mike Dean, One of Tricks Point Never, Elangelo, Giorgio Moroder, The Weeknd literally assembled the Avengers of fucking synthesizers for this album, and I love it. Big Sleep, by the way, amazing track, one of my favorites on the album. As I mentioned a little bit ago, and as you saw a few seconds ago, Abel would change the official cover art for Hurry Up Tomorrow from the cover that he revealed in the fall of 2024. Rather than the eerie portrait of Abel staring through your soul, the official cover sees Abel screaming intensely as a bright light engulfs him. It's very Blade Runner 2049, those kind of aesthetic vibes. I really fuck with it. Shortly after the release of this album, Abel would announce an official 2025 stadium tour, keeping the After Hours Till Dawn branding, and having opening support this time around from Mike Dean and Playboi Carti. Conceptually, this album does continue and finish the story started on After Hours and continued onto Dawn FM. And now that we've officially detailed the path to this album's release, it's time to uncover the actual contents and substance of the music itself. I definitely recommend checking out my previous videos on After Hours and Dawn FM. However, we last left off with Abel stuck in a purgatory-like setting. After facing his sinful past and releasing his phantom regrets on Dawn FM, The Weeknd should be set to finally embrace heaven. We witnessed Abel confronting his past vices. However, the actual rebirth occurs on this album. So without wasting any more time, let's dive deep into the contents of this record and break down this project track by track to truly understand the story behind the final Weeknd album, Hurry Up Tomorrow. Waking up after a haunting experience in purgatory, Hurry Up Tomorrow begins with the opening track, Wake Me Up, where Abel begins to come to from his previously paralyzed state. This song starts out with a heartbeat-paced beat, which, when mixed with the Giorgio Moroder Scarface theme sample, really builds up this perfect atmosphere of anticipation. There's just this insane sense of drama, and with this being the final Weeknd album, this is the perfect energy on the opener. Dawn FM ended with Jim Carrey saying you have to be heaven to see heaven. However, after reliving his past heartbreaks and coming to terms with his earthly pain on that previous album, The Weeknd wakes up with a very different mindset than what we would expect after his purgatory experience. After endlessly searching for heaven on Dawn FM to find peace for his soul, Abel states that there is no afterlife on this opening track. Now this is where I kind of had a hard time deciphering exactly what reality Abel is waking up in on this opening track as Hurry Up Tomorrow begins, because, is he waking up from the coma on After Hours? Was Dawn FM just a near-death experience and he's waking up from purgatory and he's officially in the real world? It almost seems that way on first listen. However, with Abel's constant posts of sci-fi movies and David Lynch projects on socials throughout this album's rollout, we gotta expand our minds a little and keep in mind those inspirations when trying to decipher this album's story. With that being said, I believe that Abel wakes up in the afterlife here on track 1, yet he just doesn't realize it because he has to, in a sense, pass a spiritual test. That test? Kill the Weeknd. I know this sounds a little crazy, but if you've seen Twin Peaks, if you've seen Fire Walk with Me, this does align with those Lynchian concepts that Abel seek to find inspiration from. The ideas of ending cycles of violence, ending cycles of suffering, finally setting tortured souls free to find peace. But of course, it's important to note that this whole kill the Weeknd concept and this album as a whole is a lot less literal and meant to be a philosophical metaphor for how Abel feels at this stage in his career. In his mind, it's Abel Tesfaye versus The Weeknd. Now, with all that being said, you may be asking, why didn't Abel wake up in heaven? Because that was certainly the implication following Dawn FM, right? He learned that he had to be heaven to see heaven. On Less Than Zero, he seemingly parted ways and left his pain in the past. However, that's the problem. As this track begins, Abel shows us that he did not learn from his experience in purgatory, returning to his nihilistic mindset as we talked about a little earlier, and also claiming that all he has in this life is his legacy as a musician, a very earthly possession. And again, we see Abel kind of thinking he is in real life. He's waking up. He doesn't realize he's in some like simulated afterlife experience, which is my whole theory on this album and kind of the plot here. Because as you remember, Abel ended up in that coma in the first place in purgatory due to his own coping mechanisms, dealing with heartbreak, dealing with him and his girl parting ways. Now that he officially wakes up here, he is all alone. All he has is his career. Abel dug deep, searching for heaven on Dawn FM, but after hearing that you have to be heaven to see heaven, and then waking up here, it defeated him. The Weeknd scars just run too deep. And there you have the general conflict on Hurry Up Tomorrow. In order to see heaven, in order to find peace for his soul, Abel must defeat the manifestation of his past sins, guilt, and shame in this crazy sci-fi fucking story. Abel must kill the Weeknd. It's fucking brilliant. The dramatic synth intro then leads to a beautifully smooth beat drop. And I gotta say, we've been talking about the lyrics of this intro track a whole lot. The instrumental is so catchy, and everyone pointed it out right at the start. I will too, of course. Very much thriller energy on this song. The beat was co-produced by Justice, which Abel has been teasing a collab with them for a very long time now, so it's great to finally get that here. Just a very impressive track, and as Abel sings from this nihilistic mindset, this beat beautifully contradicts that gloom. Along with believing in no afterlife, Abel speaks on this opening track as if he is very close to death, saying phrases like "I'm running out of time," "It feels like I'm dying," and along with singing that he feels like he's paralyzed. We see the biggest piece of evidence towards my theory of Abel being stuck in this limbo between purgatory and afterlife as the track closes out and the Weeknd sings the final chorus. Abel states, "Wake me up, 'cause I'm trying. This sleep is paralyzing. Wake me up, 'cause I'm dreaming. It feels so damn real." To me, that settles it. This reality that Abel apparently wakes up in, it's not that it's not real, but it's not in the real world as we know it, as the Weeknd knows it. On the pre-chorus, Abel sings, "Are you real or are you an illusion?" displaying the inner turmoil that acts as the main theme for this album. As we discussed, the Weeknd versus Abel, Abel versus his dark past, and demons. But the next line introduces the other major theme, Abel's relationship with the fans and fame as a whole. In saying, "I fear your love is my delusion," Abel's talking about the love from fans, specifically their love for the Weeknd name. Many have attachment to that brand just due to nostalgia, due to memories with the older songs and albums. But for Abel, those old tracks have become sonic representations of his past trauma. He needs to shed that skin. While this album is mostly focused on self-reflection, our trilogy here, the new trilogy, After Hours Till Dawn, began because of Abel's reaction to heartbreak. You could certainly interpret that last line we talked about, "I fear your love's my delusion," to be about Abel's past love on After Hours, because as Wake Me Up closes out, we transition to track 2, Cry For Me, where Abel speaks in far more detail on his past love. Again, I just want to point out how far Abel is regressing from what he learned on Dawn FM, because on Less Than Zero, we finally see him learn that, like, no matter how much you love somebody, if they don't give you that same love and respect and attention back, fuck them. You gotta leave them in the past. Yeah, here we are, track 2, and our boy's down bad. Abel is immediately calling back to her, calling out to his lost love at his most vulnerable. We also get some clarification as to Abel's condition after purgatory. It's not 100% clear, but he sings about his soul slowly leaving, slowly bleeding, also not being able to breathe. After his experience on Dawn FM, Abel is almost trapped deeper in death, stuck in this simulation type of buffer between purgatory and nirvana. But he thinks he's in the real world again. He thinks he's back to being a musician in our reality. We'll see it here in a few tracks, but he literally is like, fuck, I'm dying, but BRB, I gotta go make an album. However, through all of his suffering, through it all, Abel still pawns for his lost love at his lowest. And the only hope he has as his spirit slowly leaves is that she still thinks of their relationship the same way that he does. It's a really weird thing. Sometimes you make a connection with somebody only for that love to be broken, tiff, an argument, break up, and you never talk again. Despite the fact that you lost that communication, sometimes with some people you never lose the feelings. And this track is essentially all about that unfortunate phenomenon. This song really reminds me of some of the sleeper hits off of Starboy. I don't know what it is between Abel's desperate vocals and the sparkling synths that pop up all throughout this song's instrumental. Like, I just genuinely feel as if this is one of the more underrated tracks off of Hurry Up Tomorrow. Despite acting as if he was over his ex and had moved on with his life, Abel has loved her this entire time. And he confesses here that he'll do anything to feel her love once again, but it's just too late. Taking an even further step back, another way to possibly interpret that line could be that Abel is living a lie because he isn't the Weeknd, at least not anymore. On the second verse, Abel begins to focus on his relationship with the fans, specifically on this album referring to the masses as the crowd. The Weeknd loves his fans, no doubt about it, but the state of mind he described during the SoFi incident was one with rampant anxiety, and in that state, when standing out on stage at tens of thousands of people, the faces blur. Abel's status and fame play a key role into his damaged condition on this record, mainly with him describing the immense pressures and anxiety that come with being a musician, as well as the loneliness that comes with being at the top. While the fans have so much love for The Weeknd and the hits that Abel has released under that title, the works of The Weeknd are all a product of Abel transcribing his heartbreak and personal pain into music. That is the basis for this interior battle between Abel and The Weeknd. That's the explanation for the name change. The Weeknd is a very damaged man who seeks heaven and seeks peace. However, once again, Abel wakes up and he thinks he's in the real world. He thinks the show must go on. As we established, Abel is a very broken man. His love is gone. He doesn't have much left. In fact, the only thing he has left is his legacy, is his voice. It's The Weeknd's most prized possession. It's all that Abel has left. And on this spiritual journey, it's taken from him. On track 3, I Can't Fucking Sing. This interlude is an obvious reference to the SoFi Stadium incident. And on the short 12-second snippet, we could hear a very distressed Abel exclaim how he's having some issues with his voice before finally yelling that he can't sing. The instrumental starts skipping frantically as we transition to track 4, Sao Paulo, featuring Anita. Once again, when faced with adversity, we see Abel return to his sinful ways, coping with the loss of his voice by hitting the club and partying with a random girl after the show. This is very reminiscent of Abel's indulgence of the nightlife in After Hours, which I think is the intention. It's once again him reverting back to his old ways despite the enlightenment he received on Dawn FM. As I mentioned, Anita is featured on this track and she is singing the refrain, but I also mentioned during the timeline for the rollout of this album earlier in this video how this track in particular really grew on me. And what I mean specifically is the bridge. When Abel is singing Take It Easy on Me and those synths are really coming together, what a fucking moment. Sonically, the synths just build this intense atmosphere as Abel comes to terms with the fact that he is at his lowest, he is completely broken. And that acceptance sets the transition to the next stage of this afterlife experience. The transition is signaled through yet another short interlude piece, track 5, Until We're Skin and Bones. The track begins with the outro to the Sao Paulo beat, followed by this sporadic synth jingle riff, and again it kind of signals that transition to the next stage of Abel's afterlife experience as the beat drops for track 6, Baptized in Fear. Over a slow and haunting instrumental, Abel details his fate after partying on Sao Paulo, revealing that he got home, took a bath, being pretty fucked up, and then experienced paralysis in the bathtub. going under and drowning in a likely self-inflicted death. This death is actually Abel separating himself from The Weeknd, as on this song, for the first time on this entire album, Abel officially presents himself and The Weeknd as two separate entities. He describes this insane visual of seeing this figure in the corner, representing himself, staring at him, laughing at his suffering as water fills his lungs. Really powerful stuff. This is an incredibly emotional track, and Abel's delivery over the eerie instrumental is unbelievable. It's the little things, like the breath sound effect after Abel says "can't breathe," that makes The Weeknd's music so special to me. On the chorus, Abel sings "voices will tell me that I should carry on," insinuating that he is being guided on this journey, walking through the corridor. Also, this line works as a double entendre because many fans, upon hearing that Abel was retiring the Weeknd moniker, voiced frustration and desire for him to continue releasing music under that title. Despite the voices telling Abel to keep carrying on as The Weeknd, it's a personal must. He must shed the skin, end this chapter. Losing his voice broke Abel, and after reconnecting with his worst vices on Paulo, proving why he has been the chief of sin, Abel officially stops resisting fate, succumbing to the darkness, giving up, and being consumed by his suffering. Abel describes this as a dark rebirth, as being baptized in fear, which is a fascinating phrase. Baptism symbolizes spiritual purification, a cleansing of one's sins and devotion to God. But by saying baptized in fear, Abel's essentially saying that he's accepting fear as his final truth. It defines him. On this song, Abel compares himself to the Apostle Paul, which is interesting for multiple reasons. First off, you may remember when we were talking about the rollout, Abel posted that picture of St. Paul back in the summertime 2024. However, Abel, at this current stage of our story, sees himself in St. Paul, referencing a line from Timothy 1:15 in scripture, where Paul refers to himself as the chief of all sinners before converting to Christianity and dedicating his life to God. In the same vein as the Apostle Paul, Abel's past is riddled in sin. Abel's past is The Weeknd. Overall, Abel's desire on this new After Hours Till Dawn trilogy is to cleanse his soul, and baptized in fear is a traumatic yet necessary event on the path to eventually achieving that peace. As Abel spiritually surrenders to the darkness and officially passes over, this track beautifully transitions to track 7, Open Hearts, possibly the most groovy and upbeat hit on this record. Despite the infectious instrumental, this track's subject matter still is rather dark, and our deeper understanding of this track's meaning all ties to the official music video. The video begins with Abel in the back of an ambulance, calling back to his death in the back of a flashing car on After Hours, specifically on the track Faith. I'm really fascinated by this idea that Dawn FM and this album all occur in the time of this short ambulance ride. You know, with everything past After Hours being in the afterlife, like distortion of time is a real thing with comas and sleep, it makes sense. But as for the lyrical side of things on Open Hearts, Abel hints at his spirit leaving our world on the opening lines, while on the chorus, singing about uncertainty, not knowing exactly where to begin as he officially sheds the skin of The Weeknd. I've mentioned it a few times in this video naturally, but with Abel officially moving on from the Weeknd moniker after this release, the news saddened a lot of fans. Many fans have an attachment to the Weeknd name, myself included. As Abel officially starts anew, he hopes that his fans will accept this change with an open heart. But change is hard. So Abel guides us with this catchy ass melody, relating this spiritual reset to someone trying to fall in love again after having their heart broken, something that everybody can relate to. And continuing off of that, overall this track delivers a very true message that finding true love is extremely hard, and achieving that level of devotion requires one to truly open themselves up to another individual, revealing even their deepest scars. Additionally, getting back to the story side of things, we see vulnerability from Abel, unlike anything heard before on a previous Weeknd release. Abel is trying to open up to people, he's trying to change and break the cycle. The music video for this track showcases Abel's ride out of the desert, as he officially passes during the trip and is surrounded by these dark entities. His demons and past continue to try and drag him down, but Abel remembers what he learned on Dawn FM. He remembers the words from Jim Carrey, holding on to the truth of releasing past regrets and forgiving himself in order to find true nirvana. On the second verse, Abel sort of recaps us on the timeline so far of this new trilogy, while also reaffirming his current position, calling back to Dawn FM and being trapped in limbo, but then being drawn to what he describes as this halo, which was previously referred to on Dawn FM as the Dawn, and eventually will be referred to on this album as the Abyss. This is, again, where the music video for this song provides some additional context, as the video ends with Abel's ambulance arriving in some sci-fi Blade Runner looking city before the vehicle door begins to glow, revealing a hallway, specifically the same hallway scene from the Take My Breath music video from Dawn FM. Abel walks down the hallway to a door, opens it to reveal a room full of people, all awaiting his arrival. And embodying the look of death, Abel comes face to face with the Weeknd, donning a cloak and staring with glowing yellow eyes. The two officially become one, as Abel with glowing eyes vanishes and returns with normal pupils, but wearing that same jacket, as the crowd watches on. What a visual, displaying that inner turmoil of the Weeknd versus Abel Tesfaye as he stands on stage in front of the masses, in front of the crowd, expected to entertain. Abel explores the conflict of self versus self even further on track 8, Opening Night, which has such a trippy sci-fi beat. The outro of Open Hearts transitions beautifully into this track, but goddamn, this instrumental goes crazy. Upon first listen, I was convinced that this track was about Abel and some girl. But after the Open Hearts music video literally shows Abel and the Weeknd as two separate spirits combining into one body, it's clear to me that Abel is battling himself here. In that Variety interview that we discussed earlier, you may recall that Abel said that losing his voice was a symptom of being overcome by his anxiety. He was too in his own head. The lyrics on this track certainly read like an artist who's battling their own self-doubt right before heading out on stage. During his verse, Abel speaks about being chronically online and also self-sabotaging, overall detailing a frantic, split state of mind right before going out in front of the crowd to perform. Additionally, Abel highlights his dependence on substances to start the show and function as the Weeknd. Opening Night essentially serves as this soft, trippy intro for track 9, Reflections Laughing, featuring Travis Scott, where Abel digs deep on the duality of fame, and more specifically, the pressure he places on himself as an artist to maintain the Weeknd legacy. This song begins with an acoustic guitar, really grounding the listener from all the insane synths we have heard so far on this record, while also setting an introspective tone for this track. As I hinted at, Abel really displays how hard he is on himself, specifically with his lyrics on the chorus, with these grand operatic vocals coming in, first referencing his drowning on Baptized in Fear, and then expressing the importance of maintaining his crown, maintaining his status on the top of the music industry. Abel describes his life as being trapped inside a gilded cage. While he's famous and living in a mansion, his life was anything but enjoyable before he passed. He was all alone, unable to find love after heartbreak, and reliant on substances not only to just do his job of making music and performing, but to simply find a will to live. After the second chorus, with some additional vocals from Florence and the Machine, this voicemail plays that appears to be from Abel's ex that he OD'd over on After Hours. She apparently called Abel after the show where he lost his voice and urged him to stay strong and not let his vices consume him. But I kind of have a hard time here deciphering whether or not this was, in the storyline of course, a legit call that the girl left right before Abel passed on After Hours, or if this is just part of the spiritual mission / expedition, and it's some spirit using a super personal individual from Abel's time on Earth to impact his soul's journey, like meeting an ex in a dream. Either way, this section foreshadows the Weeknd taking control over Abel's vessel in this spiritual battle, Tragically, as his ex-love calls him, begging him to not spiral back into his worst vices, it's too late for Abel. Signaling his dark side taking control, this track ends with a kick-ass feature from Travis Scott, where he performs his verse with this deep voice vocal effect. Travis's flow, especially at the end of his verse, I think is just insane. I think it goes so hard. But it's also just notable to even see him featured on this record, because despite the fact that The Weeknd and Travis Scott have so many iconic collabs at this point, this is the first time that Travis Scott has ever been on an official Weeknd project. Right before the Weeknd moniker is retired, Travis makes the list, and here on this track, he's rapping from the perspective of the tortured artist on tour, struggling with life on the road, coping with women, and drugs. As Travis's dark-toned feature officially signals The Weeknd taking control, the themes of self-medicating and overindulgence are continued onto our next song, track 10, Enjoy the Show. Track 10 begins with a sample from a track called Homemade Gun by Loaded Honey, before The Weeknd gets into singing about his heavy dependence on substances to operate, saying that he feels as if the drugs are a part of him at this point. He then shifts his focus to the crowd, saying that through his pain and suffering, as bad as it is, he hopes they enjoy the show. On the chorus, we see Abel peeping through, asking for release, asking for The Weeknd to set his soul free, but he can't resist the drugs, he can't fight the withdrawals. Future has some contributions to this track as well, having a verse as well as some very nice backing vocals that add a lot to The Weeknd's already emotional lyrics on the chorus as well as the bridge. But to me, Abel really steals the show on this track, specifically with his performance during the fourth verse. The way he delivers that line about like a middle-aged child star, the way I'm fucking tweaking, crazy bar, but just insane song. The Weeknd, at the dawn of his termination, fried and truly on the edge amidst this internal spiritual battle, declaring that he wants to die at his peak. What a moment on this album. We see yet another crazy moment lyrically on this track, when The Weeknd sings, I don't want to make it past 34. What's the significance of 34? That was Abel's age when Hurry Up Tomorrow dropped back in January. With this being the last album he releases under the Weeknd moniker, Abel's birthday was in February. He's now 35. The Weeknd technically will never release another project, with Abel being past that 34 number. As The Weeknd sings about not caring for his health and tying drug use to the quality of his artistry, Abel feels desperation to hop off this sinking ship, screaming for help on track 11, Giving Up on Me, once again featuring Future. Produced by Metro Boomin, 106 Point Never, Mike Dean, and Abel himself, this track is separated into two distinct sections, the first of which seeing, as I said, Abel screaming for help in a sense, begging for The Weeknd to let him go on the chorus. Abel also confesses to the crowd his sins on this song, referencing substance abuse and claiming in this state of desperation that he cannot be saved. Future comes in with some additional lines after the post-chorus. I want to point out mainly the one saying, why won't you let me sleep, which has some significance towards what happens later on in our story here. But I mentioned this track being split into two sections, and part 2 is signaled with this sample from a track titled On the Way by Chicago Gangsters. And after the skipping sample, this beautiful beat comes in where Abel then starts reflecting on his past in a far more different and reflective tone. Despite the change in energy though, Abel still affirms that the relationship between himself and drugs is inseparable, speaking about substances like someone would about a true love. As the track comes to a close, there's this bleak shine of light through this calm darkness, as Abel begs for mercy from God, asking for the higher power to not give up on him despite his many shortcomings. After declaring that he believes in no afterlife on track 1 of this album, this is a huge moment for Abel as he reconnects with God and asks for guidance. But as we pass through the halfway point of this album, the power struggle between good and evil within Abel Tesfaye continues. As we hit track 12, I Can't Wait to Get There, where Abel impatiently dreams of heaven over a neo-soul instrumental while reflecting on his many accomplishments. Abel's vocals paired with a very smooth instrumental, gives this track a very angelic sound. However, there's almost a hint of something sinister in the chorus vocals performed by Tommy Parker. Again, almost like insinuating that at this point in our story, The Weeknd is having the upper hand in this battle. The intro lines also indicate darkness having the upper hand, with Abel almost convincing himself to embrace the negativity and let it fuel him before reflecting on his recent moves in real life. Abel sings of his earthly issues, specifically those amplified by his fame, like hate from enemies in the industry, as well as the media. The line about the media hates us, I think, is a reference to the bad PR and controversy surrounding the idol that we talked about a little bit earlier in this video. But overall, this track weaves in Abel's real-life industry beefs to display the negative aspects that come with having status like The Weeknd has, leading him to often, at times, be on the defense. The constant criticism and attention puts a lot of pressure on a person. It can lead to people letting the negativity consume them. It's when Abel is criticized the way he was for the idol, or even Drake sends some shots his way, and what does he do? He sends shots right back. He matches that hate. But after years and years of dealing with drama and petty bullshit, Abel is excited to put The Weeknd's soul to rest and enter heaven. He can't wait to get there. While adding to the afterlife and purgatory themes with the contents of the chorus, this track really is just an avenue for Abel to talk his shit in a sense and address some things outside of the trilogy lore that are relevant in real life on the brink of tomorrow. But the confidence certainly indicates that The Weeknd is not only in control, but he is also fighting fate. And that braggadocious energy is continued onto track 13, Timeless, where The Weeknd claims he cannot be killed. Playboi Carti is featured on this track, and he has a phenomenal verse, really adding to the aura of arrogance on this song. However, this false confidence is really a last gasp effort for The Weeknd, it seems. Not only does he hypnotically sing Timeless over and over again over some extremely psychedelic synth notes on the outro, but also the lines on the intro of this track read, "Sun is shining, it's over, it's tomorrow. Bathe yourself in light," indicating some sort of transition once again in this afterlife experience. Abel sings of being legit since he was a kid on Timeless, and that actually foreshadows the next phase of this album, as Abel seemingly goes back in time, looking back on his career and life in general over the next couple of tracks. Despite The Weeknd delusionally denying fate, the journey that he is on is one that neither him or Abel is in control of. As we reach track 14, Niagara Falls, Abel begins to reflect on a past love from his hometown. After Timeless, we see this huge shift in energy on this record, where Abel begins to look back on his life in a very reminiscent tone. It begins here on Niagara Falls, but in the midst of this simulated afterlife expedition, Abel starts literally time traveling in a sense, going back to around 2010, 2011. I get that your estimate from the fact that Abel is apparently talking about Valerie on this track, his ex-love, who is the main subject matter of the original trilogy, House of Balloons, Thursday, and Echoes of Silence. On this song, Abel sings about how he used to love this girl in Niagara Falls, specifically in the second verse, saying how he used to hold her before the sun came up, calling back to the very last track on Trilogy, Till Dawn. That closer, also known as Here Comes the Sun, is essentially all about the toxic grasp that Valerie had over Abel. How she'd only ever come to him after fighting with her boyfriend, never officially choosing Abel and putting him first, but despite the unfair manipulation, Abel can never cut her off. His feelings were too deep. It seems that on his spiritual journey, looking back on his first true heartbreak is what officially leads to the death of The Weeknd. The opening lines on this track read, "Long in my life, I wouldn't let love inside," indicating that Valerie and the emotions that Abel sings about on Trilogy is what led The Weeknd to live a heartless life of sin that is then covered on Beauty Behind the Madness, Kissland, Starboy, etc. Because the next line then says, "But I swallowed my pride," conveying that Abel is overcoming the ego, that he refers to as the Weeknd, with that phrase swallowing my pride typically meaning to like put your pride to the side and do something that's typically for the better. Considering Timeless saw the Weeknd at his most boastful, this is a huge contrast in energy and indicates that Abel is finally regaining control, able to let go of his past pain after finally putting his pride to the side, overcoming his ego. This track is a super cool callback to the Weeknd's early mixtapes that put him on the map. We talked earlier about how Abel started the Weeknd story with a trilogy and is officially ending it with another. This reference here is truly special, officially linking the two projects on a Weeknd album. Such a smooth track. I absolutely love Abel's performances, specifically at the end of his verses. But after verse 2, the moody, atmospheric instrumental slowly begins to change, as the vocals on the chorus begin to rapidly repeat and skip, followed by grand synth keys. At the end of Niagara Falls is this interlude that transitions beautifully into our next track, with Abel gorgeously harmonizing over those sparkling synth notes and singing of seeing a bright, burning sky nearing closer and closer to the end of the Weeknd journey. The way to that journey's final destination, the way to killing the Weeknd and setting his soul free, again, seems to be in reflection, as Abel concludes this track and sends the listener into the next, harmonizing of losing his life, going back in time. As we hit track 15, Take Me Back to LA. Further reflecting on his career and life in general, Abel opens up this track singing, "Take me back to LA, where the sun would kiss on my face." Early in the career of the Weeknd, Abel reiterated on a few tracks how making it to LA, making it to Cali was the mission. However, in this new trilogy we have learned, specifically on After Hours, that Los Angeles is a place that Abel now associates with sin and lust, overall evil. With those intro lines, Abel's essentially saying that he wishes he could go back to a time when he had those dreams, before he realized the horrors of LA and lost himself. But it's too late. The Weeknd stayed too long, and now it's time. After enduring the various heartbreaks described throughout the Weeknd's discography, Abel also asserts on these opening lines how he has no love left to give. He is broken. Just like on the previous track, while looking back on his past and keeping up the lore, Abel also sings specifically of a relationship. This time it seems to be the girl that he technically died over on After Hours. Abel describes both the fun they used to have, as well as the toxic details of their relationship on the pre-chorus, specifically saying how he used to cover his eyes to keep her in his life, aka turning a blind eye to likely adultery. Overall, as Abel looks back on his life as the Weeknd, as well as the details of this last relationship, we see him slowly open up and expose his true feelings. First, Abel sings on the chorus about how his experiences with this girl made him realize that he's better by himself. Having your trust betrayed like that, he never wants to open up again. However, by the time the chorus comes back the next time, Abel confesses he hates it when he's alone. He hates being by himself, only isolating in fear of being hurt once again. This again shows Abel really breaking away from the Weeknd here on this album, really opening up about essentially what has led him to live such a life of lust as the Weeknd, his fear of abandonment, his fear of being alone. In between that development on the choruses is verse 2, where Abel reflects on his life prior to his career lifting off, overall conveying the message that he feels like he left home far too soon. The Weeknd was 21 when he went on his first world tour in 2012. Being famous that young could do a lot of damage to a person, with the bright lights bringing such a dramatic change in lifestyle. Fame and fortune have left Abel empty, his soul tainted and corrupted by his own success in the most bitter form of irony imaginable. And now, Abel wants that spark back. He wants his soul. With Abel connecting to his roots and realizing that his fear of loneliness has been the catalyst for his suffering as the Weeknd, his enlightenment, while certainly something to be celebrated, is also a sign that we are nearing the end of the Weeknd journey. It is also signaled emphatically by the incredibly dramatic and atmospheric track 16, Big Sleep. This song starts out as a cryptic R&B ballad with some very moody lyrics from Abel, classic Weeknd sound, very familiar for any XO fan, until things slowly fade with the instrumental, the beat dies, reality sinks. Sharp, direct synth notes start coming in, building this tense atmosphere, with this track having direct contributions from the legendary Giorgio Moroder. As the Weeknd faces fate face on, Abel sings of his existence as the Weeknd, reflecting on his past accomplishments, which have ultimately left him soulless. Abel feels as if he has wasted his borrowed life, chasing accolades that in the end left him empty and influenced him to occupy a hedonistic lifestyle in the limelight. Now, Big Sleep is the name of this track, and the term is used to signify death. Here on this song, Abel's essentially singing of the Weeknd being finally put to rest. After some grand vocals from Abel on the bridge matching the dramatic synth keys, Giorgio Moroder comes in with some vocoder vocals repeating the lullaby, "Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep," adding to the spiritual and religious aspects to this story. And here we see again Abel reconnecting with the higher power, with the angels, his inner soul almost being represented by those Moroder vocals, desiring to be bathed in light. What a moment to have him share this track with the Weeknd, by the way. This is definitely one of my favorite tracks on this album, and it ends in incredible fashion with these operatic vocals from Abel, just so dramatic and a sound that reflects beautiful tragedy. And now, with the Weeknd's soul finally put to rest, Abel officially begins to turn to the light, starting on track 17, Give Me Mercy. Evoking the sounds and themes of a worship song, this track sees Abel directly speak to God, having conversations with the sky, as he puts it, and asking God for forgiveness of his past sins as the Weeknd. Abel touches on fighting temptation and also the abuse that he has put himself through in his life, overall declaring that he finds strength at his lowest in seeking salvation and looking to God for forgiveness. One Tricks Point Never really came through with a beautiful instrumental here, such a calming beat, and especially when paired with Abel's vocals, this creates this sound of healing. This song is super catchy as well, and at first on the chorus, Abel starts out each line saying, "I hope it's worth all the bleeding." But after receiving the mercy he desperately asks for on the earlier parts of this track, he finally, on the last bit of the chorus, says, "I know it's worth all the bleeding," conveying that all the pain he's endured was worth it, as it made him the person he is today. After searching endlessly for peace and paradise since Dawn FM, Abel finally comes to the realization that God is his way to salvation away from his past suffering as the Weeknd. And the smooth, introspective vibes continue onto track 18, Drive, where Abel opens up about wanting to live a normal life away from fame and fortune. Now in the redemption chapter of this story, this track is a sonic representation of Abel driving off into the sunset, officially leaving the Weeknd behind. Abel sings of being a child again, reinforcing the idea that he is officially separated from the Weeknd and been reborn, calling fame a disease on this track, and expressing anticipation for kickstarting his new journey after the Weeknd as Abel Tesfaye. This track is really laid back, and with the ambient instrumental, it makes for a nice break in between the heavy emotional tracks, Big Sleep before it, and our next song. Abel officially confesses his truth and lays the Weeknd to rest on track 19, The Abyss featuring Lana Del Rey. A moody, hypnotic, fast-paced piano riff kicks this track off as Abel speaks directly to the Weeknd, saying how he tried to better his past self, however, his sins were too severe, his scars are too deep. Abel has to remove this side of himself. Abel also references a poem on this track from the show BoJack Horseman titled The View from Halfway Down. As ridiculous as it may seem to take wisdom from a cartoon about a talking horse, the poem is essentially about realizing that you made a mistake when it's too late to change things. Abel relates to this message, specifically when it comes to the world telling him to not leave the Weeknd name behind. For him, there's no going back, This decision is final. The anticipation builds as synths sneak in and add to the sonic atmosphere, as Abel confesses that he has been living a lie. He no longer is the cold-hearted bad boy who doesn't mind numbing the pain with substances, hooking up with another girl to get over a heartbreak. He has feelings. Abel has matured. He's no longer the same kid who made House of Balloons, and that's not a bad thing. He's in his 30s. However, it's time to close this chapter and start anew to best preserve the Weeknd legacy. As the synths drop out and time stands still, Abel powerfully delivers an amazing chorus on this song, declaring his desire to end the Weeknd's story before he overstays his welcome, before things get too stale. Abel also reinforces his nihilistic worldview on this chorus, saying the world's not far behind in terms of going up in flames into the abyss. However, out of context of the trilogy lore, this track can be viewed as a love track, specifically with Abel's next verse after this transition in the instrumental a little bit for halfway on the track. But looking in the context of the lore, at least in my opinion, Abel officially says goodbye to the Weeknd here, saying his heart will always be connected to the persona and that he will see him on the other side. It's an extremely powerful and emotional moment on this album, and this track is sent off perfectly with some beautiful outro vocals by Lana Del Rey. Lana has obviously been one of the most beloved collaborators of the Weeknd, so having her featured here on the final album meant a lot to fans. With her feature here, Lana harmonizes beautifully with Abel while also repeating a phrase that she said to Azealia Banks during their feud in 2018, mixing it up a little bit and posing it as a question: is a threat not a promise? What the fuck does that mean? The haunting question to me has to relate to Abel retiring the Weeknd moniker. Here we are on the final Weeknd album at the abyss, at the end. It's a promise. As we near the official end to this album, Abel pauses momentarily to take a moment and sing from the perspective of his mother on track 20, Red Terror, named after the violent political campaign in Ethiopia, where Abel's parents presumably escaped, seeking asylum in Canada, where Abel was then raised. This track begins with some disorienting synth sounds, and we know this song is from the perspective of Abel's mom, as number one, Abel does not have a child, and number two, the references to enduring the Red Terror and escaping that turmoil imply that this person singing is Abel's parent. It's known that Abel's parents were Ethiopian immigrants who raised him in Scarborough. Abel's mother sacrificed to escape political oppression and raise him in an environment where he could have the freedom to drop out of high school and pursue life as a musician and create House of Balloons. Her sacrifice directly allowed Abel to pursue success and find fame. Unfortunately, that fame corrupted Abel though, and again we see some bitter irony as his success directly led to his relationship with his mother being distant and strained. On this track, Abel pierces through the perspective of his mom, declaring that no matter how heavy his sins become, she will always love him. And then as the track furthers on, he has these vocals coming in representing his perspective, apologizing for his mistakes in life that strained their relationship. Again, just an insanely powerful moment on this album. As the grand synths fade out, this track ends with a very chilling outro, where Abel sings Henry Scott Holland's poem, Death is Nothing at All. Adding context to the death of the Weeknd, Abel says that the name change is simply that, a name change. Reassuring fans that he will continue to make music, Abel says that he has simply entered the next stage in his artistic journey, and perhaps his personal life, stepping away from the Weeknd's druggy persona. On the brink of concluding a 14+ year story, Abel officially marks the transition from the Weeknd to Abel Tesfaye with the line, "Call me by the old familiar name," as we enter track 21, Without a Warning. Abel's final confession. Pawning back for his youth, where his body could withhold the substance abuse that the Weeknd indulged in, Abel faces reality on this song, admitting the damaged and worn out state of his vessel with weakened bones and fractured voice. This track's title comes from the line about Abel not being able to control his tears falling without a warning, which paints this really haunting visual for the listener. On the chorus, The Weeknd calls back to the various crowds that he's performed in front of over the years, expressing hope that his fans will continue to love him and remember the Weeknd legacy even after he's gone. The instrumental suddenly slows as this slowed down 70s R&B sample comes through, before bam, this huge beat drop hits, supported by these laser sharp synth keys. Just what a fucking instrumental. This is one of my favorite tracks on this album as well. Abel reiterates on the second verse why he needs to separate himself from the Weeknd persona, highlighting the history of his discography, talking about him constantly doing drugs and self-medicating. Abel no longer is the man who the Weeknd was, but it's not that black and white. There's a lot of trauma there. Personally, he needs to move on. With this name change apparently coming with Abel's next release, on this track he's expressing hope that fans follow him on this journey and stick with him through the transition. However, as these beautiful synth keys come through on the outro, adding to the already insane instrumental, Abel ultimately delivers the thesis of this record. Tying things back to the real-life anxiety that he faced with the SoFi incident, Abel expresses this internal conflict. He wants to leave his past behind and move on to become a better person. However, the uncertainty of tomorrow overwhelms him. It was Abel's own mind and anxiety that caused his voice to give out. While tomorrow, in the context of this new trilogy lore, it is heaven, it's some afterlife. In real life, it's simply what happens after the Weeknd moniker is retired. What happens when that safety net's taken away and Abel's pushed into the unknown. Abel details the various factors that assist to his state of panic and lack of grasp on the future, mainly always losing himself in drugs, and especially placing too much pressure on himself to be the very best, to be at the very top of the industry. While the idea of tomorrow scares Abel, it's necessary. He must put behind his past pain and move past his demons for good. He must embrace tomorrow, for it is truly his only salvation. In a final eulogy to the Weeknd, the final song on this project, Hurry Up Tomorrow, acts as an emotional and powerful end to the Weeknd's story. Supported by an ethereal and soft instrumental, Abel officially confesses his sins and asks God to burn him with his light. Abel started out this album, once again saying no afterlife with that nihilistic view. However, here he is, for the first time ever, coming to an optimistic worldview, expressing hope that there's a God above him watching over. Despite battling Abel over control of his soul and attempting to maintain his misery, after further reflection on LA and his childhood, the Weeknd has officially accepted that this is the end. And Abel says that he hopes his confession of his past wrongdoings is enough to save his soul. Overall, on this song, Abel officially says goodbye to his sinful ways, no longer desiring earthly possessions, fame, fortune, a high from a drug, or money, but simply purity, heaven, and afterlife. Abel also mentions his mom on this song, once again apologizing for losing his innocence and feeling as if he failed her. Additionally, he confesses that his constant need to never be alone and always fill that void is because his father abandoned him at a very young age, again expressing a degree of vulnerability never before seen in the Weeknd's 14-year discography. However, at the end of Hurry Up Tomorrow, Abel is no longer burdened by the Weeknd's pain. Washed in fire, burned in light, Abel is absolved of his past sins and spiritually reborn, no longer as the Weeknd, but by the old familiar name, Abel Tesfaye. As the instrumental fades, this wind-like sound creeps in. It's the exact sound on the opening of the Weeknd's first track off his first project, the song High for This. This almost indicates that the cycle of the Weeknd has continued once again. Abel has relapsed and the story starts from the beginning. However, the sound then stops with 3 seconds of silence to conclude the album, signifying the official end of the loop, Abel breaking the cycle, and his soul officially being set free from the sins of the Weeknd.